Welcome into the latest episode of the Dribble Drive podcast. I am your host, Austin Render. We are 1 week away from the start of college basketball. It is going to be incredible, and we're going to be along for the ride, which is going to be a ton of fun. A reminder of a couple of housekeeping things for you. Please download our episodes. That's the best way to get them right when they come out, and helps us know kind of what we're doing. Give us a rating, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are a part of the Back Home Network YouTube channel. So go check out all our episodes in video form over there, audio form, and Apple and Spotify podcast. Download them, give us a rating. Let us know how we're doing, how we can improve our product. I think in season, you're going to really like this podcast. We're going to be bringing a lot of people through. So hopefully we're going to have a ton of fun with it. Tell your friends as we get ready for the start of the season that the Dribble Drive podcast is cranking up into full gear. And a reminder that our Twitter page, Dribble Drive WBB, is where you can find all of our episode links and whatnot. We'll continue to tweet out from that page. And one thing you can do on that page, and I tweeted it out myself on Twitter at Austin Render, we are recording our episode with Megan McEwen of the Big Ten Network tomorrow. I want you all to have a chance to have a part of the episode. So go to our Twitter page, comment on my tweet that I tweeted out earlier today that we're asking for questions. What do you want to ask Megan McEwen about this upcoming basketball season? Tomorrow we will record our entire preview episode with her, and we will attack all the questions that you all, or at least try to get to all the questions that you all submit. So go to my Twitter page at Austin Render or the Dribble Drive WBB, and comment. Let us know what you want to ask Megan McEwen, and we'll get to those questions when we record the episode tomorrow. That episode will be aired on Friday at noon on the Back Home Network YouTube channel and on Apple and Spotify podcasts, getting you ready for the shift time as we go into the season. A lot of women's basketball games happen on Mondays, so we're going to start dropping our episodes still on Mondays, but at noon instead of the 7 p.m. time. That way it gives you some time that we can at least talk a little bit about the Monday games that are coming up that day. So again, all episodes will be released on Mondays at noon, starting on November 11th. The November 4th episode is the Megan McEwen one, which we will drop on Friday so that you have the opportunity to listen to the preview of opening day in the Big Ten. Lots of exhibition games going on. We had 3 of them yesterday. I am old-fashioned. If you're watching us on YouTube, I've got all my notes scribbled on a piece of paper. Finally talking some basketball. We had Maryland play one last week. Michigan, Nebraska, and Rutgers all in action yesterday. The big theme for me as we get into this, and that'll be one of the things we talk about as we go, is the themes in the conference. But one of the themes for me is freshmen. And there's going to be a ton of talented freshmen in this conference. So let's start with Michigan. Michigan beats Northwood 81-52. For those of you watching, we'll have some of the stats on the bottom of your screen there. But 10 players scored in this game. Again, the theme is freshmen, though. Freshman Olivia Olson led the team, 22 points, 10 rebounds. Freshman Mila Holloway, 15 points, knocked down a couple of three-pointers. And freshman Silas Sword, 7.6 rebounds, 5 steals. 3 freshmen to the starting lineup for Kim Barnes-Arico in Michigan. And I know it's an exhibition game, but kind of shows you it was those 3 plus Jordan Hobbs and Greta Kampschroeder. So they're going to be a young team. When we talked to Matt Parks, which go back and listen to that episode, Matt was talking about the youth of this team and how they're going to have to get points and production right away from this freshman class. They did in this exhibition game. They combined for 44 of their 81 points. So over half of Michigan's points came from freshmen just in the starting lineup alone for the Wolverines. They will next have number 1 South Carolina in Las Vegas for the opening game of their season. Let's shift to Lincoln, Nebraska. The Cornhuskers 89, Doane 52. Alexis Markowski led the way, 16 points, 10 rebounds, 3 blocks. Freshman Britt Prince, 12 points. Again, the freshman theme continues. Great to see Allison Widener back out there for Nebraska. She had missed 55 games with injuries, 7 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists in 19 minutes. She is a big part of it. And I highly recommend going back, listening to the Matt Coatney Nebraska episode. He talked a lot about what Allison Widener could give them as she comes back from injury. Florida transfer Alberta Rimdahl scored 10 points, and Natalie Potts, the reigning freshman of the year of the Big Ten, 9 points and 7 boards. Good to see Nebraska shoot it better in the second half, just 3 of 17 from 3 in the first half. They were 5 of 10 of the second half. That's kind of a part of the game that Nebraska could really unlock that next step for them, as if they are a big three-point shooting team. They will host Omaha next Monday on opening day. Rutgers 101, Caldwell 48. Very impressed with the performance Rutgers put on. Did not mess around in this game. They were up 50-23 at halftime. Destiny Adams, who is going to continue to be one of the best bigs in this conference, 24 points and 12 boards. But again, the freshman theme continues with Rutgers. Kaomi McMiller, 21 points. The freshman gets it going early. Zachary Perkins, another freshman, 17 points for Rutgers. The freshmen around this league are so talented. Jelani Cambridge is going to make impacts for Ohio State. There's others that we aren't even talking about. Freshmen are going to be a big storyline of the Big Ten this year. How about some of these stats for Rutgers? 31 second chance points, 31 fast break points, and 35 bench points. They out-rebounded Caldwell 63-40. Again, these are the numbers you should do in exhibition games, but it's good to see a team like Rutgers who's trying to take that next step this year, kind of dominate this exhibition game and leave no doubt who the better team was. Next up is Manhattan on opening day for the Scarlet Knights. A ton of exhibition games still to go this week. Looking at what we've got today, of course, being the 28th, Michigan State taking on Wayne State. That is today. A good slate tomorrow, which includes Wisconsin against Stevens Point and Purdue against Indiana Tech. Wednesday, a ton of games. Indiana, I'll be at Assembly Halls. They take on Maryville. Iowa gets Missouri Western. Maryland against Frostburg State. And then November 1st, a couple more. Illinois against Lewis College. And Oregon against Warner Pacific. And November 3rd, Northwestern takes on Parkside. I did not see any exhibition games for Washington, USC, UCLA, Penn State, Ohio State, and Minnesota. If I do, and anything changes there, we'll certainly report back. But as it stands, that's the schedule coming up. And then, of course, November 4th is the opening day of college basketball. And it's going to be a ton of fun. A reminder, we'll have Megan McEwen on the next episode, which will drop on Friday, previewing that early slate of college basketball on November 4th. Well, it's time to get back into our preview episodes, and we take a look at the Purdue Boilermakers. And joining us now is the voice of Purdue women's basketball, Tim Newton. And Tim, thanks so much for coming on the podcast here. And let's talk some Purdue women's basketball. This is a team that 2 years ago got into the NCAA tournament. Last year maybe took a bit of a step back, but when you look at the 23-24 season, what was it that was maybe missing for Purdue as they try to figure out how to take that next step this year?
Consistency. I think that, there were times that the team looked really good, and there were times it did not. It was not able to close out in some close games, but just from week to week, you didn't see that consistency that you wanted to see, and that's, as a result, why they had a losing season. Even though they made the NIT and won a couple of games there, I'm sure it was not what Katy Geralds wanted or expected. And so I think this is a really big year coming up to try to push that momentum back the other way and get the program rolling in the right direction.
Yeah, no doubt. 2 years ago was a great year. Last year, trying to get that momentum back. You obviously had a lot of players graduate in between last season and this season. Abby Ellis, Janae Terry, Madison Layden, Caitlin Harper. When you look at kind of all these players that Purdue is trying to replace, did you sense kind of late last season kind of a passing of the torch to some of the younger players that will now have to be in charge of this team this year?
I think so, and probably the two that are going to get the bulk of that are Rashanda Jones and Sophie Swanson, because they're going to have the ball in their hands a lot. We saw Sophie Swanson's potential finally coming off a knee injury that she suffered as a high school player. She was starting to look like the Sophie Swanson we expected the last couple of months of the season. And Rashanda Jones is the kind of player who can take a game over. But yeah, I would say certainly when you lose players that have played as many games as Terry and Ellis and Layden and Harper and those folks played, that's a lot to backfill. So it'll be interesting to see how some of the newcomers, and there are a lot of newcomers again this year, how they'll fare and how they'll fit into the whole puzzle equation here.
Yeah, we'll talk newcomers here in a minute. I want to focus on Jones and Swanson for a minute. They are the ones that return with the most production from last season. We'll start with Rashanda Jones. What parts of her game do you feel like are set to make the biggest jump here in year 2 for her?
I think she'll be a better, at least I hope she'll be a better defensive player, although I think that she was okay for most of the season last year, but I think that will be a part of her that will pick up. And I think the other thing that both she and Swanson, but really Rashanda, because she's going to be at the point a lot, the leadership. We need to have an on-court leader. You had Janae Terry, who really didn't say much, but was more of a leader by example. You had Abby Ellis, who did say a lot. But you're going to have somebody that when things get tight and people need to rally in a huddle, who are they going to go to? And I think that Jones is going to be a big part of that.
That was one of the things I had on here that I wanted to ask you about was leadership, because you've had a lot of that upperclassmen leadership the past few years. So does it kind of turn to Swanson and Jones, even though they are sophomores, to kind of lead the way?
It does, although I think a player that I've really been impressed with in that regard has been Reagan Bass, who's a transfer from Akron, had a very successful career in the Mid-American Conference, and I think is looking to see what she can do in the Big Ten in her final season. I think she's a really strong leader. Mara Petrie is another one that I don't know how much playing time she's going to get, at least right off the bat, but I think she brings some maturity to the floor, as does Ella Collier, who had a great career at Marion and now is making that transition from NAIA to the Big Ten. So I think Jones and Swanson, because they're the undergraduates and they're the ones that are going to have this program going forward, are really going to have a lot to do with the leadership qualities of this team. But I think they're going to have some help. They're going to need some help too.
You mentioned the injury for Sophie Swanson. Is it as simple as her being healthy as to how she could take that big leap here as a sophomore?
That's a big part of it. When you come off a knee injury like that, it takes, they say, a full year to recover. And that was really about what we saw. She is working on other parts of her game. We know she can shoot. That's a given. And I think she showed us late in the season last year her natural ability to score, putting the ball on the deck, taking it to the basket, pulling up from mid-range. I think that she's going to have to show a complete game on the offensive end. But Sophie Swanson can put a lot of points on the board. And right now you're looking at a program that needs scorers. And so she's going to be a big part of this team going forward.
Katy Geralds has brought kind of a new energy to Purdue basketball over the last couple of seasons. How have you seen her grow in this head coaching role since she took over?
Well, the hardest thing for her in the last 3 years is she's lost more games here in the last 3 years than she's lost in probably a decade or so at Marion. I mean, it's been hard for her to accept. I wouldn't say it because she'll never accept losing, but in the Big Ten, you're going to lose games. That's just the way it is. And I think that she has had to make some different decisions when it comes to recruiting. You're recruiting a different kind of player when you're at the NAIA level as when you're playing in the Big Ten and playing in Power 5 conferences. But, she's learning on the job. She certainly has confidence, and the confidence from not only her ability as a player, but she's been a national coach of the year. And I don't care what level you're at. When you win national championships, that shows that you're at the top of your craft. And so I do think that she's growing as a coach, and hopefully that growth will lead to some more wins here in the next couple of seasons.
What does a kind of working on all levels team for Katy Geralds look like? When they are at their best, what does the best version of Katy Geralds Purdue look like?
I think she wants to have a team that can get out and run. She really, Purdue has not been great in the half court. At least it was not the last couple of years. And there are a few reasons for that, but they're much better when their defense can trigger their offense. So I think that she would like to have a deep team that she can substitute players, keep them fresh, and put on constant defensive pressure for 40 minutes. She hasn't had that luxury yet. She may get closer to it this year with this team. She has also been very vocal. She wishes college basketball would adopt the NBA 24-second shot clock, because she says it makes the game go faster and more fluid, and you don't have to play defense as long. Katy teaches defense now. Katy was not a great defensive player when she came in here. So she has learned that through her coaching career, that's a pretty important end to have. But I think, again, it would be she wants to get up and down. She'd love to have teams that scores in the 80s and 90s. That was the kind of basketball she'd like to play. And I think that's the kind of basketball she would like to coach.
I remember seeing something, it might have been last year or 2 years ago in the Purdue game notes where it said something like, we want to get shots off before we turn the ball over. Like,
shoot it before you turn it over. Absolutely. And we say that only tongue in cheek, halfway. So that's a true statement. And as you know, there are some turnovers that are okay, that are better than others. Better to throw the ball to the tuba player than to throw it to the other team and it winds up in your basket. So it's kind of like a pick six in football. You can fumble the ball out of bounds near midfield and probably get away with it sometimes. But when you throw in like I watched the game this week, Syracuse and Pittsburgh, and Syracuse threw 3 pick sixes. You're not going to win a game when you throw 3 in one game.
That was tough. Yeah, absolutely. I flipped it on. All of a sudden, I thought I was getting deja vu because I saw a highlight of one on.
No, this
Twitter.
is not a replay. This is a different play.
Yeah, it just kept happening over to Kyle McCord's worst nightmare there for Syracuse.
Yeah.
Let's talk portal for Purdue. We talked about all the players that Purdue had to replace in the production they lost. What was Katy Geralds looking for in the portal, and what do you think she got out of these players that she picked up?
Well, she was looking for some scorers and some shooters, and I think Ella Collier fits that description. She also is looking to ramp up the defense a little bit, and probably the best player there is Destiny Lombard, who came in from Stephen F. Austin, was a defensive player of the year in her conference, and I think is a player who can change the game a little bit defensively. And looking again for some maturity. I mentioned Reagan Bass a little bit earlier, the transfer from Akron. There were some holes to fill. We talked about the players who left, and so you've lost scoring, you've lost some rebounding, you've lost some maturity. How do you fill that? Well, here are these 1-year gaps, and you don't want to bring as many people into the portal as she has had to do the last couple of years. You want to get to that situation where, as Matt Painter likes to say, you're old and you stay old, where you have these. The players that have come up through your program, but right now Purdue does not have that luxury, and so you got to fill whatever holes you got. And after last season, there were a lot of holes to fill.
Yeah, it felt like even the last 2 years, Purdue on the women's side was getting old with a lot of those players we mentioned, and now it's kind of a whole new look this year. I mean, I feel like, man, it has been ever since I got to IU. It's been Abby Ellis, it's been Layden, it's been Harper, it's been Terry. Those are just fixtures of Purdue. So does that change the identity at all of this Purdue team as they bring in all these new players and change kind of the changing of the guard in West Lafayette?
Well, it can, but I think, again, a team takes on the personality of its head coach. And we've seen Terry Morin, who, I've known Terry since she was a player here at Purdue, and in Indiana women's basketball is Terry Morin. It has her personality, it has her stamp, it has her toughness. And that's what I think Katy wants to have here is people that, again, she loves to score. She loves to get up and down the floor, understands the importance of defense. You're not going to win without it. But, Katy's also, she likes to have fun. And so she wants to bring players in and try to make the game fun and you're going to spend a lot of time on the practice court. You're going to spend a lot of time together. You might as well enjoy the time you spend. You can enjoy it a lot more if you win. And so, that cures a lot of ills. But, I think again, she'll have her stamp on this team, and as she goes year by year and grows a little bit more into the role, and we'll see what benefits that can reap.
So we've mentioned Reagan Bass, Destiny Lombard, Mari Petrie, some of these freshmen as well. Jordan Poole, a top 100 recruit, Kendall Purrier, and Lena McCarthy as well. Do you see any of those freshmen kind of needing to step into a bigger role or able to step into a bigger role in year one in West Lafayette?
I would be surprised if either Purrier or McCarthy is not in the starting lineup, but they've been very impressive. Kendall's a 6'3" player, really rugged, plays bigger than her size, plays meaner than her size. She doesn't have a lot of friends when she's on the court, very aggressive, very, very soft-spoken off the court, but very, very aggressive on it. McCarthy's a 6'4" kid out of New Hampshire, and Purdue's hoping that they can find the same success going to that part of the country that Indiana found with Mackenzie Holmes. Lana is a big kid, 6'4", has good touch around the basket, can use both hands around the basket very well. And And I think Puryear and McCarthy have really kind of bonded and have pushed each other in practice. And I would be surprised if at least one of them is not in the starting lineup come the opening game here in the beginning of November, because I think they're going to need to have some people inside. You don't have a whole lot of post players. You've only got 4 or 5 post players are going to play. And Elena Harper will be back for another year, Caitlyn's younger sister. But I think Puryear and McCarthy are going to see a lot of playing time their freshman year.
There is something about that young kind of coming in together, a pair of freshmen who latch onto each other, push each other. There's something to be said about how advantageous that can be, because as one goes, the other goes. I would imagine you've seen that a little bit as we mentioned it, just seeing those two kind of become friends, but also push each other to be better.
Oh, there's no question. I go back to when Purdue won its national championship in 1999. You had Stephanie White and you had Yukari Figs. One was Indiana Miss Basketball, one was Kentucky Miss Basketball. They played against each other in the All-Star game, and I think there was always a competition between the two of them, even from the time they got here, who's going to be the better player. And it's kind of like, I've always said Muhammad Ali wouldn't be Ali without Joe Frazier, and Joe Frazier wouldn't be Joe Frazier without Muhammad Ali. And not that you're fighting each other, but you're pushing each other and you're making each other better. And I think this is a case too with these post players. They're going against each other in practice every single day, and so they're probably going to get tired of each other, and they're probably going to be ready to face some new competition here when the season starts.
So taking a look a little bit at Purdue's non-conference schedule, headlined by, I would say, 3 matchups, with Notre Dame November 10th coming to Mackey, South Carolina in the Fort Myers tip-off, and then Kentucky under their new coaching staff and new regime. They're coming to Mackey in December. Anything stand out to you with what Katy Geralds has assembled for the non-conference schedule?
Those are 3 pretty tough games. The South Carolina game was really out of their control. That was a tournament that was you've got a third party that's putting those matchups together. I'm not sure that South Carolina would have been the first choice that you want to play, the defending national champions with what's going to be, I think, a young team that's getting it its sea legs early in the season. Kentucky, yeah, you mentioned Kenny Brooks, I think, is going to bring a whole different dimension. That's a program that has struggled the last couple of years, but we saw, because we played Kenny Brooks in Virginia Tech in Blacksburg a few years ago. And then Notre Dame, Purdue went up to Notre Dame last year on the day that they dedicated the statue for the head coach there, and it did not go well. Muffet McGraw's statue put up more of a fight that day than the Boilermakers did. So it's going to be a challenge here with Hannah Hidalgo and that whole crew coming back. So yeah, those are 3 tough games. You look at the rest of that non-conference schedule and you're starting to think, okay, if you get one of those games, great. If you get 2, fantastic. But you better win your other games, because you're going to go into a Big Ten now that has added USC and UCLA and Washington and Oregon, and your life got a little bit tougher in terms of making the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I think only one true road game in that non-conference schedule for Purdue, at Miami of Ohio. That's become a theme, as we talked about on this podcast, with a lot of Big Ten teams playing a lot of neutral site and home games throughout their non-conference schedule. You mentioned the shifting landscape of the Big Ten. You were at Purdue when Maryland joined the conference almost 10 years ago now, and they kind of set a new standard for the Big Ten when they joined the conference and started winning conference titles and conference tournament titles. And so everybody kind of had to catch up to Maryland, and they have, and Indiana and Iowa and Ohio State and Michigan have figured out how to do that. But is there going to be a similar type of thing this year with USC and UCLA coming in and maybe setting a new standard? Or is this conference better set up to compete now and deeper than maybe it was when Maryland joined?
Well, that's a good question. Austin, I've been around long enough. I was in the Big Ten when there were 10. I've been doing this before Penn State came in. So, when we actually were a 10-team conference. You mentioned Maryland. Maryland's kind of an interesting thing, because I don't think I've ever seen a team, especially here in the portal era, that's had as big a revolving door as they've had there. And I think last year was really the first year it caught up, where their influx of talent was not as good as the talent that rotated out the door. The conference, I think, is deeper. We saw Iowa, what they did with Caitlyn Clark, and we know that Indiana's been really knocking on the door the last couple of years, almost got to a Final Four. Ohio State's going to be good year in and year out. But I'll tell you, we played at UCLA last year to open the season, and it was eye-opening because that was, I thought at that point, the best team I had seen in person in a couple of years. And I was actually surprised that they didn't get to the Final Four. And now they're going to be loaded again for Bear and ready to go. And USC is even better. I did see USC. We were down in a tournament in the Bahamas, and so I got to see them play, I think, against Penn State.
Yep.
And man, Juju Watkins is the real deal. And now they've got a couple of transfers that have come in, and that team's going to be really good. So those are two legitimate top 5 programs. And then you put in Ohio State, Maryland, Indiana. I think Nebraska is going to be really good again this year. It's going to be difficult for the teams that are trying to get into that NCAA tournament bubble and get over the hump in terms of at least a 500 conference record. You got to win the games that you can win, and you're going to have to pull off some upsets here and there. And that's why your non-conference scheduling now becomes so important. And, we've seen what Indiana has done in football. People can criticize all they want, and, it's not a great non-conference schedule, but I'd rather be sitting at 7-0 right now than having a great non-conference schedule and you have a losing record.
Yeah. And I think it's also important with the scheduling now with women's basketball with 18 games, 17 teams you play one time, or 16 teams you play one time, is the home court. Defending your home court is going to be so important this season because there's going to be some teams that you get at home and don't have to go to on the road. You got to beat them when they come to your place, especially if you're trying to make that jump in the NCAA tournament. It's going to be really interesting to watch how this season unfolds. I don't know if you had as much trouble as I did trying to rank all these teams from 1 to 18. I felt like after I got through 3, I was like, oh my goodness, 4 through 16, 17, 18. I mean, that was tough.
Pull out the Yahtzee dice because you can just roll them out there and see how they tumble. Yeah, I was the same way. When you get down into like the middle of the pack, I have who's 11 and who's 14. I have no idea.
Yeah, there's so much depth.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's probably the biggest difference, Austin, than when I started. Again, when we were 10 teams, there were teams that were just awful. Michigan was awful. Minnesota was awful. Illinois was awful. If your bus got to the arena, the game was over. I mean, there was, and that was back in the days this 35 years ago. So you had 10 teams in the Big Ten. You had travel partners, and Purdue's travel partner was Illinois. So for a typical road trip, let's say we're going to Michigan State, you would play on a Friday night and you'd play on a Sunday afternoon. Purdue's disadvantage at that time was Illinois was such a bad team that those two teams didn't have to prepare at all for Illinois. They're preparing all week for Purdue. Indiana was paired with Ohio State, and you had Michigan State, you had Northwestern, Wisconsin, and then you had Iowa, Minnesota. And the only places you flew were Iowa and Minnesota. So there were a lot of long bus trips, and a lot of you had your travel partners, and so that changed. Not only when they started breaking that up, and you started playing midweek games, and now you got more than 48 hours in between games. But back in those days, again, if you were playing 18 Big Ten games, you knew right off the bat you were going to win at least 10 or 12 just by showing up.
Yeah.
And that's not the case anymore. I mean, you look at the worst teams in the league. If you're not ready to play, a Rutgers, a Northwestern, they can beat you. And we've seen that happen. So I do think that's good. I think that's good for the conference, not so good for the coaches, but I think it's good for the conference. And I think the stronger the conference is, obviously, the better you hope, the better the talent level of players that want to play in this league. And we're seeing that in volleyball. The best players in the country should want to play in the Big Ten because the best teams in the country are in the Big Ten. And you want to get to that point with women's basketball where if you want to be the best, you've got to get the best. And to get the best, you've got to play against the best. So, it's a little bit of a catch-22 because it makes it harder to win, but it also gets you in a different arena when it comes to the kind of talent that you can recruit onto your team.
Yeah, and there's going to be records, I think, this year, maybe not only in the Big Ten, but maybe in the SEC too, where you look at that record and you say, well, there's no way they're an NCAA tournament team. But then you realize, wait, 9-10 teams are going to get in from this conference.
Yes, no question. I think
we have some teams under 500 that are going to be not even like on the bubble. It might just be in the tournament.
And I think that's again, you talk about catch-22s, that's going to bend back to your non-conference schedule, because what's going to be the differentiator if, let's say, you're 9-11 or 18, so 8-10, let's say you're 8-10 in the Big Ten, what kind of non-conference schedule did you play? And if you're at if you're trying to get wins and trying to get at least in the conversation, you're going to have to dumb down that schedule a little bit so that you can be competitive. Because if you play a great non-conference schedule, and let's say you go 4-7 in that, or 5-6, you have no chance. Yep. You have no chance to get in the tournament before conference play even starts. So
yeah, a team running the table against 8 lower level teams going 8-0 is going to look better than a team that went 3-5 but played South Carolina and Kentucky and all those schools. So,
and I think you do have to play some better competition, because otherwise you're not going to be ready. If you play all cupcakes and you get into that Big Ten opener and you're facing Ohio State or a UCLA or an Indiana, you better be ready to play. And if you've not had any strong competition, it's going to be hard for you to compete right out of the chute in the Big Ten.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And kind of going on this theme of seeing the Big Ten change, just women's basketball in general, over the last, it feels like 4 or 5 years, we've really seen this shift. Attendance numbers are up, viewing numbers are up, ratings are better at television stations. How have you kind of seen the sport evolve here recently to where these crowds have gotten bigger and bigger?
Yeah, I started this back in the early 90s, and I think at that point, women's basketball was just starting, at least here at Purdue, it was just starting to really swell in numbers. And, they used to have dollar nights, and you would draw 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 people for a women's basketball game, which was not the case when I was in school here 40-some years ago, when they were trying to get Purdue's women's team out of Mackey Arena and have them play in the facility where the volleyball team plays. Caitlyn Clark has been a game changer. And I know that there's been a lot of debate, and yes, there are a lot of other great players, and that's not to downplay any of the other great players. But what I saw last year when Iowa came to Purdue for a midweek game, they played here on a Wednesday night at 8:00, and every seat in Mackey Arena was full. And nobody else has been able to do that on the women's side. We've had great players going back to the days of Katie Smith at Ohio State, and you can go right on down the list. Nobody else has had that kind of an impact. And it was like, I've never been to a Taylor Swift concert. I will never be at a Taylor Swift
concert.
Not
a Swiftie?
I'm not. I don't dislike her. I couldn't name 3 songs that she's done. But I have to imagine that that's what the atmosphere is like at a Taylor Swift concert, because it was an event. I mean, it was truly like a Hollywood star had come in. And, she's traveling with her own security people when she's on the road. That has been such a game changer, and I think it has elevated the sport. And it kind of makes me laugh a little bit when I see, you saw some of the jealousy come out from some of the players and even some of the coaches in the league. And yeah, we get it. There are some other great players. Let's give credit where credit's due. These TV ratings are up. The Indiana Fever sold out all of their games this year because of Caitlyn Clark, period. And so her impact on the game, it goes back to, I think, similar to what Larry Bird and Magic Johnson did to college basketball in the late 70s. It's a game changer, and hopefully that will continue. I'm kind of curious now with the WNBA. I see that they're talking about ending their collective bargaining agreement, and you wonder, would a work stoppage, would that stop the momentum that women's basketball has gotten? Understanding that they probably deserve more and they absolutely deserve more than they're getting now, but you have to be a little bit careful in what fights you pick and when you pick them. You're on an upswing right now. One idea is let's strike while the iron is hot, but the other way is don't kill the golden goose. So I'm anxious to see where that goes and what impact that will have not only in WNBA, but whether that would filter down then into the college game.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I highly recommend go back listening for folks at home to episode 14 with Rob Brooks. He told some really interesting stories about traveling with Caitlyn Clark. And he told one when he went to Purdue and they got on the bus and there's just fans shaking the bus as they're like trying to chant Caitlyn, trying to get her to come back off the bus to say hi to everyone. It is crazy what she did to this sport and what she did to the fan bases.
And I, at times, everybody, I think, got a little bit tired of her on-court act. Certainly her play is incredible. The act got a little bit old at times, but then when you see what she went through off the court, you understand a little bit about that. And again, I just think she's been such a game changer. Let's hope that there's another Caitlyn Clark in the wings somewhere, and that the game will continue to elevate, because it's on a roll right now, and I'd like to see it keep going.
Yeah, and that was kind of the basis of this podcast, because I think there are a ton of great players in the Big Ten that are hopefully going to be standing out.
Yeah, I mean, Juju Watkins, Lauren Betts. I mean, those two alone coming in from the West Coast. It's going to be an exciting season. I think. Like you said, you've got 3 or 4 teams that I think will probably separate a little bit at the top. But man, that from 4 or 5 on down, what a dogfight that's going to be. And I think every game will be a struggle, and that's the way it should be. That's what fans want to see.
It's going to be awesome. All right, one thing I do with a lot of the tenured folks in the conference, and
that's old.
You are old. No, not old. I would consider most of us who have been.
This is real.
Tim did get. They did celebrate his 1,000th game last year, so congratulations to you, Tim. But I like to talk about kind of the favorite places that we like to go in the Big Ten as broadcasters, starting just with like places you like to broadcast from, the arena, whether that is the arena, the broadcast location, the fan base, whatever it may be, kind of with all that mixed together. What are some of your favorite spots you get to call games from?
My absolute favorite spot used to be Minnesota, Williams Arena, because they had us in a great spot. Yep. It was at midcourt, and it was in the upper level, but it was at the bottom of the upper level, and you felt like you were right over it. Now they stuck us in a corner, and it's one of the worst places to broadcast from. So
now Justin said they're working on it. When I had him on, he said they're working on it. Now I don't want to hold him to anything, but
I'm going to hold. I will. I think Nebraska's facility, the new facility, is great, and we're courtside there. I don't like, and I shouldn't say this because I'm this way in Mackey, and I'm this way probably at Illinois and some other places. While it's kind of fun to be down by the bench where you can hear what's going on, I can't stand having to look, and I'm doing it. And Katy Geralds likes to, sometimes she will actually sit on the scorer's table right in front of me.
Yep.
And I can't ask her to move. That's not going to work. So that's a little bit tough. My favorite city, I love Minneapolis. That's one of my favorites, just because where we stay, there are so many places you can go to eat, and usually if you're there at the right time, you might be able to see a hockey game or a basketball game. So that's one of my favorite spots. I'm looking forward to going. This year we'll go to Washington and Oregon. Yep, I was just in Oregon. Actually, we played at Oregon State, but stayed in Eugene. So I spent a couple of days there, and I enjoy Seattle. So I am looking forward to that. I've been to Iowa City now probably 50 times. Same thing with East Lansing, and the thrill is kind of gone there. And they're nice towns, but there's really nothing new for me in those Big Ten cities.
That's fair. There's some new now with some of these schools we've added, but Kristen Watt was on from Ohio State. She described it as the oblique workout when you sit down on the court.
Well, that would help. Maybe I should look at it that way, because I could use some oblique help. So.
Yeah, it is interesting. A lot of the people I've had on, there's been a very mixed response to sitting on the court and not sitting on the court. Some people love it because of where you get to be and the vantage point you have. And some people don't like that vantage point. They'd rather be a little bit higher up. But
you don't want to be so like, I don't like working at Penn State. In Penn State, they put us in a suite, and to me, we're too far away from the action. I can't. You really can't understand if there's a discussion down on the floor between the coaches and the officials. Yeah. You have no idea what's happening there. Yeah. Plus, at Penn State, nobody goes.
Yeah,
so
you're kind of no atmosphere. Yeah. That's why, and I know there's a lot of cons to our setup, but I do like our setup in Bloomington because you're not right on the court, but you're not too high up. Again, there are cons. It's very squished. There's a lot of people that walk around you, but
the people coming up the stairs in front of you during a game is a little bit disconcerting, because I'm always afraid somebody's going to reach over and hit a button.
You get real protective real quick.
Oh, absolutely.
Hey, IU fans who are listening to this, treat Tim nicely, okay? Let's welcome him in with open arms, okay? Let's not touch his stuff. Let him broadcast.
I appreciate that. Thank you. The one thing I learned, Austin, a long time ago, and when I first started this, I regarded everybody from the other school as enemies, and including the broadcasters. And you realize after a while, I have absolutely no impact on what happens on the court. They have no impact. let's be civil to each other. Let's actually be friends with each other
Yeah.
and let the teams fight it out. And we're just describing what happens. Do I want Purdue to win? Absolutely. It makes the job easier. It makes everybody happier.
Yep.
I don't like to see people lose their jobs. So you want people to win. But at the end of the day, my job is to call what happened. And I have no influence over that. So you just do your job and move on, because at least until at the end, there's always a next game and a next season.
It's great words. When we were at the IU-Nebraska football game the other day, there were some fans chirping at each other from the two sides. And I'm like, it just doesn't make any sense, because none of us have any influence on, even if Indiana wins over Nebraska, you didn't do anything to earn that win. So we're all sports fans. Let's just enjoy the fact that we love sports, right?
Yeah, no question.
Yeah. Well, Tim, we appreciate your time coming on here. I'm excited. We are 1 week away from the college basketball season. Very excited for it, and looking forward to we get Purdue. You have to deal with us twice this year, but maybe
this will be the year we can break that string. We'll see.
It's never easy. I tell you what, last year, it's never easy when we come to Mackey. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Tim, thanks so much, and best of luck this season. We'll chat soon. Sure.
All right. Thanks, Austin.
All right, that'll wrap up this episode. We appreciate you all for listening to us. Reminder that you can find us on Apple and Spotify podcasts and the Back Home Network YouTube channel. Again, next week's episode, which would normally be on a on a Monday, we're going to release it on Friday. We're going to have Megan McEwen joining us, so we want to give you some time to listen to that. So we're going to release on Friday, November 1st, for the games on November 4th. And then from there on in, every episode will be released on Monday at noon Eastern Time. For Tim Newton, I'm Austin Render, saying so long from the Dribble Drive Podcast.